standing inside a burning airplane. You are 18,000 feet above the ground. Outside the windows is nothing but blackness. Below you is Germany. Your aircraft is falling. And then you discover something worse. Your parachute is on fire. This was not a movie. It happened to a 21-year-old British airman named Nicholas Alkemade on a March night in 1944. He was the rear gunner aboard an RAF Lancaster bomber returning from a bombing raid over Berlin. The aircraft had already been attacked by a German night fighter. Now, flames were spreading through the bomber. Alkemade had only seconds to decide what to do. Stay inside and burn to death, or jump and fall more than 3 miles to the ground without a parachute. He chose the second option. What happened next should have been impossible, because Nicholas Alkemade didn't die. He didn't even break a bone. He survived. And somehow, he was able to tell the story. Before that night, Nicholas Alkemade was not famous. He was simply a young British man who had joined the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. He trained as an air gunner and eventually became a rear gunner with No. 115 Squadron. His job placed him at the very back of the Lancaster bomber. It was one of the most dangerous positions in the aircraft. From there, he watched the darkness behind the bomber while scanning for enemy fighters. On March 24, 1944, Alkemade and the rest of his crew took off from RAF Witchford. Their aircraft was a Lancaster Mark II. Its name was Werewolf. Their mission was Berlin. Hundreds of RAF bombers were heading toward the German capital that night. But the return journey would be very different. The bomber survived the raid. Then, somewhere over Germany, a German Junkers Ju-88 night fighter found them. The enemy aircraft attacked from below. Cannon fire ripped into the Lancaster. And suddenly, the men inside Werewolf were fighting for their lives. The attack came fast. The Lancaster was hit. Flames erupted inside the aircraft. The situation became chaotic almost immediately. Smoke filled the fuselage. The bomber began losing control. And in the rear turret, Alkemade was trapped. He needed to get out. But there was a problem. The parachute he needed was not ready to save him. It was burning. As the fire spread, Alkemade attempted to move toward the front of the aircraft and reach another parachute. But the flames were already blocking his path. His flight suit was burning. His face and hands were being burned. The aircraft was spiraling downward. And Alkemade realized something horrifying. He no longer had a parachute he could trust. He had one option left: jump. He later explained that staying inside meant being burned alive. Jumping meant certain death from the fall. Neither choice offered survival, but one would at least be quick. So Alkemade made his decision. He went back toward the rear of the aircraft. Then, he stepped into empty space. There is a moment in every fall when the ground is still too far away to understand. For Alkemade, that distance was enormous. Approximately 18,000 feet, more than 3 miles. There was no parachute above him, no aircraft beneath him, no safety line, nothing. Just the freezing darkness. At that altitude, the air was bitterly cold. The bomber disappeared above him, and Alkemade began falling. There was no conventional explanation for what happened next, because somewhere during that descent, something extraordinary happened. Instead of hitting the ground like a projectile, his fall was interrupted. Not by a parachute, not by a safety net, by trees. Below him was a forest, and beneath the trees, deep snow. Alkemade crashed through the branches. The trees absorbed some of his momentum. Then he plunged into the snow. and somehow he survived. For several hours, nobody knew where Nicholas Alkemade was. His aircraft had crashed roughly 20 miles away. The bomber was destroyed. Several members of the crew were dead. But Alkemade was lying alive in the snow. Eventually, he opened his eyes. Above him, through the branches, he could see the night sky. He checked his body. His arms moved. His legs moved. There was pain. But he was alive. His injuries were astonishingly minor considering what had just happened. He had suffered burns and a leg injury, but there were no catastrophic fractures, no crushed body, no shattered skull. He had fallen from approximately 18,000 feet without a parachute and survived. And then came one of the strangest details in the entire story. Alkemade reached into his pocket. He found his cigarette case, and he lit a cigarette. Think about that. Minutes earlier, he had fallen 3 miles through the night. His aircraft had exploded. He had crashed through trees and snow. And now he was lying in a German forest, smoking a cigarette. But surviving the fall was only the beginning. Alkemade was eventually found by German forces, and now he had another problem. He was a British airman in Nazi Germany, claiming that he had fallen 18,000 feet without a parachute. The Germans were understandably skeptical. To them, the story sounded impossible. So Alkemade was questioned. Was his parachute really destroyed? Had it failed to open? Was there another explanation? But then investigators examined the evidence. The wreckage of the Lancaster was found, and the remains of Alkemade's parachute supported his story. The ripcord handle and cable were still in their storage container. The evidence suggested that he really had left the aircraft without deploying a parachute. The impossible story suddenly had physical evidence behind it. Alkemade wasn't making it up. He really had fallen. He really had survived. And the story became so extraordinary that even his captors wanted it documented. There is another remarkable chapter to the story. After being taken prisoner, Alkemade's survival became known among Allied prisoners. His story was eventually formally documented. A certificate was produced stating that Sergeant Alkemade had descended from 18,000 feet without a parachute and landed safely. The RAF Museum preserves the account and notes that the certificate described him landing in deep snow among fir trees. The details were extraordinary. He had fallen farther than 3 miles. His parachute had not saved him. The aircraft had not saved him. The snow and trees had. And yet, even that explanation doesn't completely answer the question. Because surviving a fall from that height requires an almost absurd combination of circumstances. The trees had to slow him. The snow had to cushion the final impact. His body had to strike the branches and ground in a survivable way. And perhaps most importantly, he had to somehow avoid the injuries that normally make a fall like this fatal. One tiny difference, one branch missed, one harder impact, and this story would have ended very differently. But it didn't. Nicholas Alkemade lived. So how did he survive? There is no magical answer, and there is no evidence that he somehow defied gravity. Gravity won. Alkemade still fell. What saved him was the environment he fell into. The pine trees acted like a giant natural braking system. Each branch absorbed some of his momentum. Then came the snow. Deep, soft snow provided another layer of deceleration. And his clothing may also have absorbed some of the impact. But even all of that doesn't fully explain the odds. Because a fall from 18,000 feet is not normally survivable. Alkemade's story is extraordinary precisely because so many unlikely things happened in exactly the right sequence. The aircraft had to force him out. His parachute had to be destroyed. He had to fall into a forest rather than an open field. The trees had to break his fall. The snow had to cushion him, and his body had to survive the impacts. It was not one miracle. It was a chain of improbable events. Break just one link, and Nicholas Alkemade probably never wakes up.
On that March night in 1944, Nicholas Alkemade looked at two impossible choices. Behind him, a burning aircraft. Ahead, 18,000 feet of empty darkness. He chose the darkness, and somehow, the darkness gave him back. There is no way to make the story ordinary. A human being fell more than 3 miles from the sky without a functioning parachute. He crashed through trees. He landed in deep snow. And he opened his eyes. Alive. The statistics say he should have died. The physics say the fall should have been catastrophic. But survival isn't always about what should happen. Sometimes, it's about what happened. Nicholas Alkemade's story is a reminder that history occasionally produces moments so improbable they sound fictional. Except this one wasn't fictional. There was a crashed bomber. There was a destroyed parachute. There was a forest. There was snow. There were witnesses. And there was a 21-year-old airman who somehow walked away from a fall that should have killed him. 18,000 feet. 0 parachute. 1 survivor. Nicholas Alkemade. And that is one of the wildest survival stories ever recorded.